welcome to this presentation on how to make a research poster. This presentation is brought to you by the McMaster Society for Engineering Research and is meant to be a guide to undergraduate students who are taking their summer to do a research project and now want to share the results of that research through a poster. So the first time making a research poster can be a little complicated, so this is going to be a guide to the basic first steps to go about that. How are you going to assemble your very first research poster? So my name is Evan Wright, and I'm a PhD student in chemical engineering here at McMaster. And both during my graduate studies here at McMaster and in undergraduate research of my own, I've had to make a lot of research posters. So I have a bit of experience in this, and I'm going to share with you, a guide to the basics of it and some of the tips and tricks that I've picked up. So with that, let's get started. So what we're going to go through in this video is why poster presentations are important. So why is it that we want to put this together in the first place? We're going to go through how to create a research poster. So what are the basic content of a research poster, really? I'll give some tips for actually presenting your poster and sharing it with an audience. And then finally, we'll go over some common questions and some questions that were submitted ahead of this recording. So poster showcases are very common in academia as a way to share the complex research that you've been doing and simplify it down and share it with a broader audience. They're very common at your own university, at research conferences, and even at other public venues sometimes. So understanding how to put together a good poster is a really good skill to have. These posters are a summary of your research, distilling down the most important points and communicating the most important messages, and are a great opportunity to practice presenting your research to different audiences. So you'll need to be able to share your research both with people who aren't knowledgeable at all in your field and people who might be experts in your field. So you need to be able to share that information with both those different audiences. Posters can also act a lot like a business card almost. If you're at a large conference with hundreds and hundreds of guests, this can be a great way to get your name out there and let people know what you're working on. And finally, posters are a great way to add to your CV. They're a good way to say that you know how to take a complex issue and break it down and communicate it in a simple way. So before you begin working on your research poster, you should ask yourself, who is the audience for this poster? Are you going to be presenting this at a highly technical research conference, or are you going to be sharing this with other undergraduates at like a poster showcase? Because how you design your poster might differ a little. How technical you are in your presentation might differ. So that's important to consider. Before you begin, you're also going to want to think about what the primary finding that you're trying to showcase is. Research posters need to be concise, so you really are going to want to find what the key findings are and focus on those. Instead of sharing every little detail, you're going to want to figure out what your main message is and then really hone in on that. And finally, you're going to want to think about how can you visually communicate your research. A lot of you are probably used to writing things up in reports, using text, but posters are a visual method of communication. So how can you translate that text you're used to writing into figures, graphics, flowcharts, things like that that will help communicate everything visually instead. So here we see an example of a poster that might not be the best. And I want you to keep this in mind as we're going through the following sections as an example of a poster that might need some work. So we'll come back to this later, but just keep this in mind for now. So let's start with what's the basic content of a poster then. So this includes a header, the introduction or objective section, a methods section, your key results, your important conclusions, any references you've used, and then finally the acknowledgements. So first of all, the header, this is where you introduce what your project is all about. You'll want a catchy title that will help draw people in to come see your poster. Ideally, the title will be using a plain language so that people walking by your poster who might not be too familiar with your field of research are able to understand what your project is about. You can also consider having your title be like a catchy question or something to help draw people in or pique their interest. In the header, you'll also have the names of all the authors. It's important to give proper attribution to everyone who contributed to the project. And you'll also list the affiliations of everyone who's contributed to it. So often it will simply be, one department at one university, but projects can also be very collaborative sometimes. So maybe you've worked with someone from a different department or even from an entirely different university, and you need to highlight that. In the header, you can also have the McMaster logo and, simply highlight that we're from McMaster University, and then logos of any collaborators you might have worked with. So again, other universities, other departments, or any companies you might have worked with as well on the project. So here's some examples of what your header might look like. Again, you'll see we have titles that highlight what the core of the research is. We have all of the authors listed and the affiliations of those authors, and we have the logos of the involved institutions prominently displayed, whether those are the universities or the private companies involved. If your research group has a unique logo as well, you can also include that here sometimes. Next comes the section on the introductions and objectives of your project. And it's important to realize that on a poster, you typically do not have an abstract section. Your poster is the abstract for your project. Your poster is the reduced summary to help quickly convey what your research project is, so you don't need an abstract on your poster. You can go right to the introduction where you can summarize the literature kind of leading up to your project, help introduce the background behind your project, and maybe present a hypothesis or an objective behind your research. So let the reader or the person listening to your poster presentation know, why are you doing this research? Why is this research important? And what's everything that's led up to it? So the introduction section will normally be fairly short and fairly concise and is simply a few bullet points, maybe a few small images. And again, you're simply trying to convey what is the important background information you need to know to understand why this research is important. Next will be the section on the methods used in your research. And here you want to outline the kind of key protocols and methodologies you use to collect and analyze your data. Now, it's important to realize that, again, a research poster is not simply a rewriting or retelling of a full research paper. So you want to highlight your key methodologies. So you don't need to list every single piece of equipment used. You don't need to list every single method used, but really focus on the major methods or any unique methods. If you came up with a new method to help support this research, that's really what you're going to want to focus on. You can also consider dividing this section into subsections if it's applicable. So in some fields, you might do significant data analysis or data manipulation to get from your actual raw data to final presented data. So you might want to discuss how you did that in this section. And ideally, as always with posters, this section should be made of images if possible. Again, we don't want to be simply listing out written protocols as we would do in a paper. We want to make everything as visually appealing and as graphical as possible. So think about using, little clip arts, little graphical abstracts to help highlight your research. Flowcharts, things like that. Those can all be great ways to help convert, what can be a really dry and boring written methodology into a simple to understand kind of visual methodology. So here are some examples of what your methods section might look like. Again, as you can see, we're trying to make everything as graphical as possible. We're using flowcharts, we're using images, we're even using a direct image of our experimental setup and adding some annotations onto it. We're doing everything we can to make sure we're not just using text. We're trying to make it visually appealing here and communicate the complex methods at a glance. Next comes the results section. Here we're going to report the key findings of our research. And as always, as I've been saying, we're going to use images where possible. Don't just write out what the results are, show those results directly using graphs, charts, tables, and any sort of pictures you can come up with as well. Now, it's important in this section that we're going to want to focus on our key findings. There can often be a lot of supporting results or minor results involved in a large research project, but we're really going to want to focus on what our key findings are. What's the takeaway we want the person reading our poster or listening to our presentation to get? Finally, don't forget about statistics. So we need to consider, are our findings actually significant, and we need to convey that on our poster as well. So a good results section might look something like this. It's largely made up of graphs with a few key points to help convey what those graphs are and why they're important. We have our statistics listed on our graphs, and we have our key takeaways highlighted. So what is it that we specifically want the reader to take away from this? Next comes the section on discussion or the conclusions. So what are the main research outcomes? Maybe talk about the next steps for your research if possible. So why is this research important? Where is it going in the future? Has it been published already, or is it going to be published in the future? And really wrap up all of your work by stating how is it important to the field as a whole? Who's going to gain from this research, and where is it going to go in the future? So this section is usually fairly short and can be summarized with a few key text points. But of course, as always, if you have a good way to summarize this using a graphical method, feel free to do that as well. But usually just a few key text points is a good way to wrap up your poster in the conclusions or a discussion section. So as with every work we need to reference all of our work cited in the references section. So let's say in your introduction, you gave a statistic to support why this research is important, or you highlighted some previous research you're building on. Well, here's where you can give that citation. As with all reference sections, be consistent with your formatting, and you can consider using some condensed formatting methods to help, make sure you're not using too much text and taking up too much space. But it's a good idea to speak with your supervisor for specific formatting instructions for the references section, and just to understand how they might like it conveyed. Finally, there'll be an acknowledgement section. This is where you can include the names of people who have helped support the research. So any technicians, collaborators, industry partners, and sponsors. And you're going to want to include all funding agencies and grants which help support your work. And ideally, you'll include the logos of those organizations if possible. And once again, it's important to talk to your supervisor so that you can get a good understanding of all this funding and support that went into your project that you might not be aware of. So an acknowledgement section, once again, simply a small little addition onto the end of the project. We see the important sponsors are highlighted, their logos are included when possible, and we've acknowledged everyone who has contributed to the work. So some general kind of do's and don'ts for poster design. So first off, make sure your font is legible from a distance. Your title should be legible from, multiple tens of feet away, actually, because you want to attract people to your poster. And then the body text of your poster, you ideally want to be legible from a foot or two away. So ideally, font size 30 or 32 should be really your minimum. You should be using a consistent font. Don't be swapping between fonts as you go from section to section. And you can use bold or italics to highlight and emphasize different sections. Use clear images, and if you're taking images from an external source, make sure you're referencing them. People naturally read left to right, top to bottom, so make sure there's a logical flow to your poster. If someone is reading your poster by themselves, they should ideally start in the top left corner and then kind of go down in columns and end in the bottom right corner in the font when they're done reading your poster. Finally, make sure all your data charts are legible. Someone shouldn't have to squint or lean into your poster to be able to read exactly what your data and graphs are saying. And finally, make sure you have a short overview of your poster prepared. You don't want someone to come up to your poster and simply you stand there while they read your poster. You want to talk them through your poster. You want to give them an overview of what it's about and kind of walk them through it in an interactive manner. So finally, some quick don'ts for your poster design. Don't use crazy colors, don't use contrasting colors and really bright colors. Stick to a simple color scheme. Avoid including too much text. Again, remember, posters are a visual format where you want to display things, graphically as much as possible. And you can always elaborate, while you're presenting the poster if necessary. Don't have any uneven spacing between your text and your different sections. Make sure things are nicely aligned in columns on your poster. And most of all, don't have any unclear font that might be, difficult to read. It should be a clear and easy way you're communicating. So to format your poster and to make your poster itself, you can consider using software like PowerPoint, Adobe Illustrator, or Microsoft Publisher. A standard poster size is 4 feet by 3 feet, either in a landscape or portrait format. And then after you've designed your poster, you can get it printed on campus. There are options like the MSU Underground and MPS printing services. And you could even go off campus to something like Staples to print your poster if necessary. So with everything we've gone over so far, let's go back to that first example of a poster that might need some work. And let's look at where this could use improvement and what might be wrong with this poster. So if we take a look at it, first off, we can avoid some unnecessary images, like maybe an image of the campus building over there in the top right-hand corner. We want to be focusing on the research itself. We see a large abstract section when posters really don't need abstracts. Again, posters themselves are meant to be the summary of your research. You shouldn't need a summary of your summary. We see that there's so much text on this poster here that it simply becomes daunting for someone to walk up and read it. The text is too small and there's just simply too much of it. A lot of this should be translated into either graphics or at the very least turned into point form that's easy to digest and easy to understand. We see it can be a little misaligned in a lot of times. We should have our captions aligned with our figures, and it's very crammed. There's not a good use of white space here. Ideally, these three kind of columns we see should have a bit more spacing between them. So these are just some of the kind of common mistakes that we might see when people go and put together their first poster that can be improved upon. A good example might look something like this. We see there's lots of good spacing. The text is in point form and it's easy to understand. There's a good use of graphics to display the methods and the results. And overall, it looks a lot more inviting than that previous poster. If you had the two side by side, which would you be more likely to walk up to and try and understand? Well, it's the poster that looks more simplified, that looks more graphic and more inviting, really, is the one that you're going to want to go look at. So here's another example of a good poster. As you can see, it's pretty clear. It has a nice and simple color scheme and design. It's not too crowded. It has good use of graphics and follows a good visual flow. Again, another example for your reference. A good clear color scheme. Sections are well organized and it has good visual flow to it. Results are well presented, relatively easy to understand. So this should ideally be what you're aiming for as like a good kind of basic poster layout. So when it comes to presenting your poster, what are the best ways to do that? Well, it's important to realize that the poster presentation should really be like a quick elevator speech, a quick pitch almost. So you want to start by having a short speech prepared. Don't just read off your poster. Don't just start at the introduction and read off point by point. You're going to want to start with a very short summary of the key points of why is this research important, what was your key takeaway, and what are you going to do from here. After you've given that short speech, you can then engage with your audience and follow up with their questions or follow up on more details, then kind of diving into your poster. So instead of like walking through your poster line by line, highlight the key points and then go back later and follow up on details that you might want to expand on more. But it's important to start with that short 2 to 3 minute pitch and then build from there. And as you're presenting your poster, don't forget to create a story. Start with the beginning, introduce the problem, why is this research important, have a middle, what was our key finding, what did we do to achieve this finding, and then an ending. Where are we going from here? Why is this research important? And this is the story you're going to want to tell to the person you're presenting your poster to. So finally, some common questions for designing a poster. How are you supposed to condense all the information in a complicated research project into a limited space on a poster? Well, it's important to realize that a research poster does not need the same amount of detail as a paper. You're not trying to convey every little detail, all of the background, all of the methodology. You're trying to focus on one key message. So you can leave out some of the complicated methodology. You can leave out some of the previous research and the complicated background. And if necessary, you can expand on all that while you're talking with someone. You don't need to include it right on the poster. So by eliminating kind of all that complex nitty-gritty detail and focusing on the key results you want to talk about, the key message you want to get across, you can often trim a lot of the fat that way and focus in on what exactly you want to show. Another common question, is there a poster template we can build off of? Well, a first stop might be to visit brand resources at McMaster and simply search for the research poster template. But another really good option is to talk to your supervisor and other graduate students in your research group. So they'll often have a poster template that they want you to work off of or that you can use as a good starting point. A lot of research groups try and use a consistent poster template, so this is really where you should maybe go for your first poster template. Another common question might be, how do I make my poster stand out? You know, you're going to be presenting this poster beside lots of other people doing the same thing. So how are you going to attract people to come see your poster? Well, again, it's important to realize that posters are a graphical method of communication. So focus on the graphics, not the text. Have images, have flowcharts, have graphs. Don't just simply write things out line by line. Have a really clean and not crowded, polished visual appeal to your poster. It needs to be visually engaging, it needs to be appealing, it needs to be inviting. And something that helps with this is to have a really engaging and understandable title. So a title that really grabs someone's attention and makes them curious and makes them want to come over and read your poster. So by doing all of this, you can get a poster that someone who might just be walking through the room, it will catch their eye, it will, they'll be engaged and they'll want to come and read more. And you can also consider some alternate poster formattings, but talk to your supervisor first, of course, because these might not be what they're expecting. But there are alternate poster templates out there that focus on unique ideas, like having a really bold section in the middle for highlighting your key findings, or one very large graphic in the middle to convey the idea of your research. So there are lots of alternate formats you can explore like that might have different points of emphasis on the poster, but still convey all of those key points that we've discussed. So it often happens a lot during a short undergraduate summer research project that you don't really have a full set of results. So what do you do with that? Well, you can show what you have so far and then discuss future work and what you might expect to see in that future work. So whatever results you do have, make sure you show them, but then of course expand upon, what are the next steps? What might you see in those next steps? And if your results are really sparse and you need more content, you can focus more on your methodology. So really highlight anything unique you've done in your methodology that people might be interested in. So if you developed a new method, or you've tweaked a method to suit your research purposes, you can really highlight that and show that as an important part of your research. And with that, I'd like to thank you for watching this video on how to make a research poster. Hopefully this was a helpful tutorial.